Recognizing Oak Bay, Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise and stand in support of the hoist motion brought forward by my colleague from Saanich North on the islands. Let me start, Honourable Speaker, by saying this government claimed that it had 4 conditions that needed to be met prior to its supporting natural gas. Now, when I spoke at second reading, I pointed out how it was somewhat ironic that this government criticized the former Premier Christy Clark for having 5 conditions with respect to Trans Mountain, and they criticized them, and rightly so, by pointing out that there were never any metrics against which those 5 conditions were judged, and so those 5 conditions were met magically because the former Premier, just said so without saying why they were met. Well, here we have a situation where this government has now got 4 conditions. Very proud of those 4 conditions. Fair return, jobs and training for BC workers, respect and partnership with Indigenous communities, and meeting climate commitments. The point raised by my friend here from Saanich North and the Islands is that we need an additional 6 months' time. And as I outlined earlier, the reason and rationale for that is directly embedded within the 4 commitments of this government. Meet climate commitments. There is no way right now that this government can say that this project meets climate commitments. It doesn't, period. Clean BC, for which government deserves credit, articulates a pathway only towards 3/4 of the emissions reduction target by 2040. There is a gap of 6 megatons, 25%, that still needs to be found. 3.5 or closer to 4 megatons of that would be found right away if LNG Canada did not go forward. So to claim that the condition has been met about meeting climate commitments is false. Therefore, the government's 4th condition has not been met, period, today. As such, I expect and hope that those members in government who claimed to have some concern over the climate issue would actually see this amendment for what it is. It's giving government opportunity, the time to reflect upon what is required in that further 25%. How are we going to get those 6 megatons? You know, that's a lot of megatons, given that the entire province of British Columbia only puts out around 64 megatons annually. We have found in Clean BC a pathway to reduce emissions by 3/4 of the 40% reduction relative to 2007 levels that are required by 2030. But that 25%, 6 megatons, or 10% of the total of BC emissions, has yet to be found. Even in the pathway that's been articulated, it is but a pathway. There are some, but very few measures that have got rolling. The methane regulations, we're still awaiting those. Some of the statements with respect to building codes, we're still getting some of those. Some of the industrial activity changes, we're still getting those. So there is no way in a million months of Sundays that this government can stand up with any credibility and say that we have met our climate commitments if we pass this bill. Just false. Number 2, respect and partnerships, which is the 3rd condition of the government's. Now we know, I needn't go on about the Wet'suwet'en and the Unistoten camp, that there clearly are still issues with respect to respect and partnership. I need not go much further to the west, but when you go to the Site C region, we clearly have more issues with respect to Indigenous respect, partnerships, and truth and reconciliation. So again, government claims that that box has been ticked, but I would argue it hasn't, which is why, again, the motion brought forward by my colleague here is perfectly reasonable and ultimately supportable in light of the fact it would give government 6 months more to actually get to deal with some of the truth and reconciliations with the Wet'suwet'en and in particular the Treaty 8 nations around the Peace River area. Jobs and training. We've heard government say, okay, that box has been met. But it hasn't, because we've heard nothing about it. I know from personal experience that I've had friend who worked on the Boscalis dredge, literally from Victoria, worked on Boscalis dredge. So, but not for very long. There's lots of stories, Honourable Speaker, about the hiring practices going on in that area. The fact that Boscalis is not a Canadian company, it's a Dutch company. The fact that Boscalis has contracted a Newfoundland company to find the employees to work on the Boscalis dredging camps. And guess where they're coming from? BC? No. Everywhere else in the world, but not BC. So we have a problem there with respect to with respect to that as well. On top of that, we have the jobs and training. The fair return. The fair return. Now, this is where it gives me enormous pleasure to read a few quotes about the so-called fair return. And I will underpin that with some direct statements by members of the government as to what exactly that means. I've tried to argue, in particular, I highlighted with the resignation letter of an employee within the Ministry of Energy and Mines, the resignation letter, which essentially points out, if I could, without rereading the entire letter into the record again, I should say that, the summary, it says, in my opinion, a much closer look should be taken at any cross-jurisdictional royalty competitive comparisons, as BC's current gas royalty figures include revenues from gas, liquids, and field condensate, which is dissimilar from other provinces such as Alberta. Again, the 6 months requested by my colleague in this hoist motion would allow government time to actually explore that. In addition, there's other questions with respect to the deep well royalty credit, which I've articulated and outlined is essentially a great generational giveaway, which was initially brought in place to incentivize deep drilling, and now is applied to 99% of all drilling. Basically, anybody who's drilling anywhere gets a credit. Again, this royalty structure has not changed since 2003 or 5, except for the expansion of the drill credits. So again, it's pretty clear to me that we're not getting a fair return, and it's even worse than that. Not only are we not getting a fair return, we're not getting a return, period, and we are subsidizing an industry to coming, and the ratepayer has to build a Site C to deliver electricity that we're going to lose 50% of the construction costs every time we sell it. Every kilowatt hour of electricity sold to LNG Canada from Site C is going to lose British Columbia ratepayer something like 5 cents for every kilowatt hour. That means that you and I are going to necessarily increase our hydro rates to pay for this promise by the BC NDP, which is being done only, as far as I can tell, to do what Christy Clark couldn't, because the economic rationale simply doesn't fly. If it did, we'd have companies clamoring to come to BC. But no, they're not. What we have is LNG Canada, a global multinational with very clever negotiators who saw a change in government and thought, lambs to the slaughter. Here come our negotiators. Here come our negotiators. And the deer stuck in headlights walk in and say, what can we give you? What can we give you? Because we want to deliver what Christy Clark couldn't. We know we've got a litany of quotes a mile long about how we're hurling abuse at them, but we really want to deliver. What can we do? And LNG Canada say, this is great. We got them now. Okay, eliminate the PST on construction. Okay, sure. We need the steel tax tariff removed as well. Okay, sure. We don't want to pay the carbon tax. Every other British Columbian should. Oh, okay, sure. But you have to be cleanest in the world. Oh, we will be. Oh, but we're not anymore, so we've got to redefine what clean is. So now you can use natural gas in the compression, but clean, we're going to pretend that Louisiana export facility doesn't exist, so we can still get exemption. We of course, wouldn't want to have to use electricity in the compression, because that could be costly, so we'll use natural gas, but we know we can get those at NDP because we know they're not thinking this through. So we're going to keep those royalty regime in place for the upstream natural gas, and we're going to use natural gas in the compression. Bingo, suckers. We got natural gas we're going to use for free that we're going to pay no one for, so we can compress our natural gas to sell it. I mean, we are literally dealing with, frankly, negotiations that are embarrassing. It's embarrassing to think somehow that we've got a good deal here. And the member from Skeena stood up and had the gall to complain about natural gas prices. If he thought this through for 1 second, he would realize that what happened in Australia is going to happen in BC. When Australia developed its LNG industry, the domestic price for Australian natural gas went through the roof. And that is exactly what's going to happen in BC. So while we might be thinking about affordability, as soon as you create a demand, a massive demand for a resource that we're not claiming any royalties on because we've given that all away, You know that we're going to have to compete for our own domestic supply for that same resource, and prices are going to go up. Good thinking, NDP. Really good thinking about the long-term prosperity of this province. You know, Honourable Speaker, coming to these quotes, let's take a look at what the Premier had to say. It's the Premier of our province who, when in opposition and during the estimates for the office of the Premier, was asked a number of questions. He was asking questions of Christy Clark, who was the Premier at the time. He said this: "The question I hear wherever I travel, in the interior, on the island, in Vancouver, what I hear is this: is this government selling the store? Are they giving away these resources without getting a return back to the people who own those resources?" Sadly, when you look at the information that's made available to us, it's infrequent that we get complete stories from the BC Liberals. We're not getting access to project development agreements. We're not going to be able to take a look at those. I'm fairly confident that Petronas has been well taken care of in these documents, but I have no understanding or no ability to understand whether or not job protection is there for British Columbians, whether the resource will get a fair return to those who own it, the people of BC. We'll see later on. We're cutting deals, said the Premier, and we'll let you see it when we're done. Ironic. We still do not see those deals. We are trying to, with this bill, repeal the project development agreement that Petronas was given. I don't see government bringing forward an agreement with LNG Canada that this House is able to debate. I don't see that happening. If anything, transparency is going the other way. We're becoming less transparent from where we were with the BC Liberals. And in terms of the statement, what people are telling me is, are we giving away the store? Well, as I've mentioned earlier at second reading speech, the proposal by the BC NDP is to take what the BC Liberal giveaway and to put it on steroids, to actually take their LNG Income Tax Act, an act that would have brought BC some revenue when the companies were making money, and saying, you know what, let's just eliminate that. But ironically, bringing in the credit that was embedded within that. So talk about unbelievable. Is not only are the NDP wanting to eliminate the LNG Income Tax Act, they want to retain the credit that was embedded in that in a hope that maybe a few head offices will get set up here. Wishful thinking. This is what else the Premier had to say. This is also very relevant as to why we need to give a bit more time, because I don't think, Honourable Speaker, that the Premier and his party have thought this through. They haven't reflected upon the comments they made historically and on the rationale for those arguments, what's fundamentally underpinning why they put them forward, and they don't see how they apply now more than ever. He said this: "We need to have an open discussion about the value of our resources and who we're trying to benefit most." Very salient words. We need to have an open discussion about the value of our resources and who we're trying to benefit most. Because the government overpromised on LNG. My fear, and the fear of many British Columbians, is that the secret agreements that are being negotiated right now are going to be giving away that resource. Well, my, isn't that ironic, Honourable Speaker? The secret agreement being negotiated right now are going to be giving away that resource. Well, we saw in the end, we saw what the BC Liberals proposed. We saw that. The NDP hurled abuse at them when they brought it forward. Just vitriol. The level of vitriol that was emanating from that side at the time across the aisle was remarkable. I've been consistent on the member from Powell River. The member from Powell River Sunshine Coast suggests it wasn't me. I've been consistent on this file since day one, Honourable Speaker. Since 2012, I've stood up and said it was not economic in 2012. It was. So, okay, to the member of Powell River Sunshine Coast, I wonder if he can look himself in the mirror tonight when he stands up and votes against these amendments, knowing that he somehow thinks that he stands for climate change mitigation. This is a difficult. I realize you're chirpy because this is a difficult decision for you. But I would suggest that perhaps you might reflect internally a little more on the decision you have to make shortly. The decision you have to make shortly, rather than chirping because you don't agree with what's being said. Because what's being said now is the truth. The truth of the matter is this: the LNG were against the NDP were against the LNG Income Tax Act. They were against it because they felt it was a giveaway. They felt that the BC Liberals were not doing due diligence and were giving away our resource. Those are the words of the Premier. He said this: because the government overpromised on LNG, my fear and the fear of many British Columbians is that the secret agreements that are being negotiated right now are going to be giving away that resource. But what's the secret agreements that the BC NDP negotiated? Not only eliminated the income tax, but actually kept in the royalty, exempted the PST on construction, eliminated the steel tariff, exempted LNG Canada from increases in the carbon tax, and agreed to give them Site C electricity that the ratepayer is going to pay 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour for, and sell it to them at 5.4 cents a kilowatt hour. So you and I are each going to pay and lose 5 cents plus for every kilowatt hour of electricity that LNG Canada uses, and they're not required to use electricity in the compression. They're not required. And we've given them the upstream natural gas for essentially free compression. You know, hats off to LNG Canada negotiators. They really were dealing with a bunch of suckers, I tell you, because they came out of this. They came out of this with the sweetest of sweet deals that it is embarrassing. I don't know who was on the BC NDP negotiating team, but it's embarrassing. Going back to the Premier's comments, because the government overpromised on LNG. My fear and the fear of many British Columbians is that the secret amendments that are being negotiated right now are going to be giving away that resource. The Premier continued, we're going to be tying the hands of future governments when commodity prices do go up, which they usually always do. We, the people of BC, the owners of that resource, will not be able to benefit from that because we're locked into agreements that were signed by a desperate government trying to make one promise. Say that again. The people of BC, the owners of that resource, will not be able to benefit from that because we're locked into agreements that were signed by a desperate government trying to make one promise. Now that was the Premier talking to the Liberals in 2015. Now, as I articulated, while he was very concerned that the owners of the resource, the BCers, were not going to get royalty, now we've taken that to a whole new level. Oh, how the chicken comes home to roost. Just one second. That's too bad. Just one second, Honourable. Secondly, the challenge, what the Premier also said, the challenge then is, are we putting in place a royalty regime that does not meet the needs of a growing economy, does not meet the needs of a resource that will go up in value? The benefit of that will be realized by the company and not by the owners of the resource. Nothing has changed. The benefit will be released by the company and not by the owners of that resource. Those are the Premier's words. The Premier's words, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, the Premier was also very critical of the Prosperity Fund and other promises that were attached along with the promises of wealth and prosperity for one of all. This is what he said here too. Instead, there's an agreement that gives money to the company, that gives tax breaks to the company, and gives royalty concessions to the company. Good deal for Petronas, not such a good deal for the people of British Columbia. Promise made, promise broken. Those were the words of our Premier on July the 13th, 2015, in discussion of the Petronas Development Agreement, or the LNG Project Development Agreement, that this government wanted to repeal. He said this: instead, there's an agreement that gives money to the company, that gives tax breaks to the company, and gives royalty concessions to the company. Good deal for Petronas, not such a good deal for the people of BC. Promise made, promise broken. The fact that this is on record, and the fact that we're now debating the LNG Income Tax Act, that my colleague has so wisely suggested be kicked down the can for 6 months, so that we can actually reflect upon this, is critical, because we need to understand what on earth the Premier was thinking. If he was thinking that back in 2015, the LNG agreement signed by this government with Petronas was, and I quote, giving money to the company, gives them tax breaks and gives royalty concessions to the company, if he truly believed that, which is promise made, promise broken, good deal for Petronas, bad deal for people in BC, how can he stand before this House, before the people of British Columbia, and say what we're bringing forward with LNG Canada is a good deal for a BC, and for British Columbians. There simply is no credibility to that statement because what is being brought forward in terms of the LNG Canada deal takes the deal that the BC NDP had with the Petronas to an entirely new level. An entirely new level, Honourable Speaker. Exemption of steel tariffs, exemption of PSD in construction, elimination of the LNG Income Tax Act, but retention of the royalty credit, essentially electricity at the industrial rate for even though you didn't have to use electricity in the compression, and on top of that, we'll exempt you from the carbon tax because you're going to be the cleanest in the world if we redefine what clean is and forget about the fact that there actually is electric compression in an LNG facility in Louisiana. Remarkable. The Premier was also very critical of LNG emissions, Honourable Speaker, and trying to reconcile his statements on that with respect to the present bill requires further reflection and delay, which is why my colleague has brought that amendment forward. This is what the Premier said. What is the result of all of the efforts of all of us in this House and all of the citizens of British Columbia by reducing their personal footprint? The government allows a company from Malaysia to come and increase our overall emissions by 8.5%. That's massive, absolutely massive. So all of you out there who are doing your best, who are buying into the notion that if we all work together, we can get out of the morass that industrialization has brought upon this planet, all of us who want to work together to address the challenge of our generation, one project that the ragtag people say is going to have an impact were the forces of no. I mean, again, everything the Premier said with respect to Petronas applies to LNG Canada, but on a higher scale. 8.5% increase of emissions. LNG Canada got an environmental assessment approval for 4 trains. That's essentially 9 gigatons, which is 15% increase of emissions. But all of this seems to be lost upon the Premier. What about the Deputy Premier, Honourable Speaker? Maybe the Deputy Premier, because she led the NDP at a time that they ran an Axe the Tax campaign in 2009 election. One might be somewhat cynical and think that perhaps she's not very supportive of the climate plan, but then again, she did fund Clean BC in the budget. You never quite know, so let's get a sense of what her comments were, to get a sense of what she believed when the Liberals were in power. And again, coming to 2015, back in July, we're debating the Project Development Agreements Act. This is what the Deputy Premier said. In other words, there will be no future climate change action in the LNG without a cost, without a huge cost to the company. The agreement says that specifically. It says it specifically. It's unbelievable. One of the biggest issues facing us, the issue of climate change. Clearly, Honourable Speaker, the Deputy Premier believes that climate change is one of the biggest issues facing us. She says this, and one of the biggest issues facing us, the issue of climate change, and the Premier says, that would be Christy Clark, don't worry, there will be no changes to do with climate change. There will be no new regulations. There will be no new requirements over 25 years when it comes to the LNG industry. Unbelievable. No future discussion around greenhouse gas emissions with the industry. No future discussion about the costs of offsets or future targets or additional changes that may occur in 25 years. We don't expect any kind of change when it comes to climate change and the industry for 25 years. Extraordinary. So the Deputy Premier in 2015 expressing the same frustration as the Premier, as the now Energy Minister, as the member from, a number of other members. And my colleague here has noted some of these inconsistencies and suggested that a 6-month hoist is in order to ensure that we come to grips with some of these inconsistencies so that we can better articulate how this proposal before us today actually fits in with a climate plan for which we've only identified 75% of the direction towards the end. It further says this. She also said that she was very critical about LNG being given away for nothing. This is what the Premier said. This is her bill today. They being the Liberals, want to see plans that move economic growth, along and do it in an environmentally sound way. They want to make sure that although this province is built on resource development, it does it in a way that protects our land and air and water and fisheries. That's what the people of this province care about. Actually, sorry, they were the people of British Columbia. They don't want our resources given away for nothing. They want a fair return. They want a fair share, and they want a fair share for current and future generations. These are the words of the present Deputy Premier when referring in 2015 to the debate on the LNG project development agreement with respect to Petronas. Again, she said, they being the people of British Columbia, they don't want our resources given away for nothing. They want a fair return, they want a fair share, and they want a fair share for current and future generations. They don't want to pit the economy against the environment against the economy, and that's exactly what this bill does. She says, referring to the BC Liberals, that's exactly what this bill does. The hypocrisy that we today are debating, well, we're debating amendment to give us 6 more times to reflect upon this, but we're debating an amendment on a bill that actually takes the Petronas project development agreement to a whole new level, and all these words about not wanting resources to be given away, wanting a fair return, not wanting to sacrifice future generations, all of this applies. Yet the hypocrisy of what is before us is it is now the BC NDP putting this forward. The BC NDP, those who campaign to be there for British Columbians, concerned about climate change, concerned about future generations. There is not a single member of the BC NDP who tonight can go home, look at the mirror or look at their children and say anything other than, I betrayed you today. I betrayed you today because I voted against your future. I voted to give away a resource, that we could have actually protected and preserved. And instead of sending our province in a path for economic prosperity in a diversified 21st century economy, I hijacked your future by building Site C and ensuring that your hydro rates are going up to subsidize this, by exempting this company from the LNG, from the carbon tax. So you go and do your stuff to reduce emissions, but it doesn't matter at all because the signal we're sending is LNG Canada can add 4 megatons right away, and when they put the 4 trains in, it'll be 8 megatons. 8 megatons is 15% of all of British Columbia's emissions as of today. This is not a climate plan. This is why we need those additional 6 months. We need to justify this pathway with the fact that we've only identified 75% of our target, and there is nothing right now on the books that will take us to 100% of the way. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. But not yet. No. Sorry, Honourable Speaker. My colleague and I have to coordinate because we are about 3 in our caucus. When there are committees on, I have a colleague who I will be designated on this particular speaker, so I just noticed the green light went up. I know my colleagues would like to hear more of my quotes here. The difficulty we have is coordinating someone who's in a committee at the same time, and she will be speaking to this amendment, and I must give my colleague a few minutes notice to give her some notice. So there's some more criticism and these are important to, I've got a ton of comments from MLAs to bring forward, but these are instrumental key figures in the present government. The Premier, the Deputy Premier, who's the Finance Minister. This is what she also said. We have an opportunity here to stand in this legislature and talk about local benefits, to talk about support for education, to talk about support for a diverse, value-added, modern economy, to talk about investments in people, which are our greatest resource. Agree 100% with those sentiments, and we've been doing a lot of that in collaboration with BC NDP. But this is what she further says. Not to talk about a giveaway to simply meet the Premier's political agenda, which is what we're talking about right now. Frankly, those words also apply today, except the agenda is to try to deliver what Christy Clark couldn't. That's essentially it. That is the driver for this deal. Oh, we can deliver what Christy Clark couldn't, aren't we? Good. Let us give away the farm and hope nobody pays any attention to it. And then, perhaps the best quotes of all. There's 2 here. These are from April the 15th, 2015, both of them, in response to the Liquefied Natural Gas Income Tax Amendment Act, an act that The NDP voted against, as I articulated in more detail at second reading. I voted for this amendment because, unbeknownst to any rational thinking in my mind, the BC NDP voted in support of the LNG Income Tax Act at first reading in the fall of 2014, and I voted against it. I was the only one here. That act passed. It had loopholes in it. It had problems with it. The Liberals brought in an Amendment Act in the spring to close a lot of those loopholes and tighten up the legislation. Obviously, bad public policy is on the books. The Amendment Act came forward. I voted for the Amendment Act. I remember speaking to the then finance minister saying, how could you not vote for it? I didn't like the act to begin with, but it is bad, and you're making it better. But this is where, explain the rationale, I don't know. NDP voted against making it better, but they did. And in that speech, the now Deputy Premier said this: given this government's direction and this government's record around LNG and LNG commitments, I have to say that this is an incredibly troubling direction. To think that you could take a tax credit and decide that we'll just up it. We want to give industry a little bit bigger tax credit. We won't take that to the legislature to be debated. We won't let the public know ahead of time that that's a direction we're looking at. We'll just do that by regulation. We'll sit in the cabinet room, we'll decide that by regulation, and then we'll publish that regulation later. Well, let's have a conversation about some of these things that are happening by regulation. Exemption of PST. Exemption of PST in the construction. Did we debate that here? No. Happened in regulation. What about exempting LNG Canada from increases in the carbon tax? Nope. Happening in legislation. What about exempting LNG from the requirement of having to use electricity in the compression to get the industrial rate? No. We're going to do that through regulation. What about royalty regime changes? No. We're going to do that through regulation. So again, yet another remarkable example of pot meet kettle, and please don't call each other black, because this is just something that you cannot make up, even if you wanted to. The hypocrisy is just mind-boggling. She also said this: I worry that this is exactly what we're seeing with this government in this bill and in their direction around LNG, is in fact a sell-off of an asset in hopes of seeing some part of industry come forward to be able to invest in our province. It's not a direction that I support. It's not a direction that we on this side of the House support. And it's not a direction that the public supports, most importantly. They would also say that these resources belong to British Columbians. To give them away without fair value for British Columbians, to give them away without jobs for British Columbians, and to do all of that with a cone of secrecy is the wrong direction for our province to go. It's the wrong direction for a government to go. Wow. That's all I can say. Wow. Let me read that again. I want to read it again because it's important that this sinks in to those BC NDP backbench MLAs who are going to vote for this. Those NDP MLAs who have the gall and the audacity to tell their constituents that they're champions of climate change. The gall and audacity to stand with the children on the steps of the BC legislature and saying, we're here for you as you protest. Across the world, millions of these students, and stay away from school on Fridays, pleading on their leaders to take action on climate change. Let me read that again. So that
he's stumped. You got him.
did I miss the D?
Yes. Direction.
Oh my. It's been a long day, Honourable Speaker. Let me read that again. And Hansard might want to just put interjection in there instead of explaining the interjection. So with respect, Hansard, interjection, please. Sorry, what was that? Yeah. Well then, we got the nod from Hansard. Thank you, interjection. That's awesome. Okay, let's do this one more time because it's important to read this again, and it's important to read it slowly and articulate each syllable.
Please continue.
I worry that this is I worry that this is exactly what we're seeing with this government in this bill and in their direction around LNG, is in fact a sell-off of an asset in hopes of seeing some part of industry come forward to be able to invest in our province. It's not a direction that I support. It's not a direction that we on this side of the House support. And it's not a direction that the public supports, most importantly. They would also say that these resources belong to British Columbians. To give them away without fair value for British Columbians, to give them away without jobs for British Columbians, and to do all of that with a cone of secrecy is the wrong direction for our province to go. It's the wrong direction for our government to go. I say wow again. We're not debating the LNG. We're not debating the LNG project development agreement. At least, whether you like it or not, I clearly voted against it. I did not like it, but at least we got a chance to debate the Petronas Development Agreement when the Liberals were in. I was pretty miffed that I had to move my summer holidays and come back on July 15th to do it with 2 weeks' notice, but we did it. At least we had that opportunity. Here, the remarkable aspect of this is much of this has been done, despite the fact that the now Deputy Premier said we shouldn't be doing this, has been done through order in council, most of the giveaway. And we're left with a couple of things. Repealing the LNG Income Tax Act, essentially repealing the act that allowed the province to earn some money. They basically said you can have it, we don't want any money, because LNG Canada clearly walked in the room and said, we're not giving you any money for this. This is part of a giveaway, just give it to us. LNG NDP said, okay. That's presumably what happened, because we have no Income Tax Act now, but they want to retain that tax credit. All done through this bill. And remarkably as well, we are claiming to be climate leaders, and which is why the delay of 6 months is very important to actually give us some time to reflect upon this. I'd like to come to a dear friend, one of the MLAs in this chamber that I respect above most, high integrity, very thoughtful, a commanding presence when he speaks. That's the member from Vancouver West End. Let me tell you what he had to say. This is what he said in the debate in July about an alternative path that's required. And he said this: we need to be moving to a cleaner path, a greener path, a more healthy path that actually recognizes climate change impacts today, in the future and distant future, because it's going to get worse. It could be way worse, or it could be bad. This government has decided to go with way worse. That's referring to the Liberals. We know it is already bad. We feel it today, but if this government continues on this path, they're going to be putting the pedal to the metal, so to speak, to drive up emissions, increase the climate instability, and create climate chaos. That's the Liberal record. That's the Premier's record. Look at the science, he said. Look at the math. Look at this agreement. Look at your conscience. Look at the future. You can't support this agreement of locking in 25 years of no environmental protections, giving away the store, and harming the future. I can't support this agreement on environmental reasons alone. It does not make sense. It's bad for the future, and I will be voting against it. My challenge to the member from Vancouver West End is, hopefully, you'll realize that with this motion before us, this amendment before us to give us 6 more months, you will stand and support this amendment, because you realize that what is actually before us now makes what the Liberals brought forward pale in comparison. They looked like remarkable fiscal conservatives in their dealing with LNG relative to what's going on now. Here we look like we don't know what we're doing, frankly. We just say, what do you want? We'll give it to you. There's no benefit for British Columbia. We may get a few hundred jobs in the construction phase. Even there, most of the construction is going to happen in Asia. There'll be a boom and a bust. I suspect even if it gets built, it won't be operating for very long. We've had a bunch of snake oil promised to British Columbians, and this government is no better in that regard than the previous government. To the member from Surrey Wally, who's sitting there looking at his phone, who I know wants to recall and think back upon his sage words of advice that he presented to this legislature on April the 15th, 2015, when speaking against the response to the Liquefied Natural Gas Income Tax Amendment Act. This is what he had to say. Yet now before the House in Bill 23 and Bill 26, this bill is a mechanism to lower dramatically corporate income tax returns from these projects and natural gas royalties. The total tax return, the return from the publicly owned resource to the citizens of British Columbia, is diminishing once again. And the mechanisms by which that's done, the agreements by which this is entered into, are not going to be disclosed publicly. Well, pretty remarkable. Same thing happening right now, except, Honourable Speaker, the giveaway is being taken to a whole new level. Because as I've articulated multiple times before, the LNG Income Tax Act, government wants to repeal it. That's one place where we're going to get some income. However, they want to keep in place the tax credit. We've already, as articulated earlier, given away $6 billion in credits from the deep well royalty regime. $6 billion with 3.2 unclaimed credits, $1 billion of credits into the future. We're not going to earn money from royalties. We don't want LNG Canada to pay the carbon tax, of course, so we're going to call them cleanest in the world, despite the fact they're not, because we're going to redefine clean to make sure that, by definition, LNG Canada is the cleanest in the world. That's the definition, it seems to me, because as far as I can tell, government's making this up on the fly. I mean, I have a bunch more comments from the member from Surrey Wally, but I think I've made my point. The point being quite clearly that in 2015 and 2016 and 2014, government members were sitting in opposition, and they were profoundly troubled about the direction that this then government was going. And time after time, speaker after speaker, they stood. They stood and passionately argued for worrying about the issue of climate, worrying about climate change. And that's before the forest fires that happened 2 years in a row in BC. That's before the flooding that was going on. That's before the absolute devastation that's there now in Mozambique, where vast swaths of land are turning into a lake, flooding towns and villages. It's before all that. They were passionate about this, but then they became into government, and the thrill of having the decision-making power and the potential challenge of doing something Christy Clark couldn't, well, that just was too much. And so here we are before us, debating a bill which we need more time to look at, the 6 months more, which is why this amendment is so critical. We're debating this, and we're basically saying, how low can we go? How desperate are we in British Columbia? How desperate are we in British Columbia to deliver what Christy Clark couldn't? You know, internationally, we know that Canada's natural gas reserves pale in comparison to those of say, Iraq, of Qatar, Russia. They're smaller than the US. We've got active production in Australia. The world is a glut with natural gas because despite what the BC NDP and before them the BC Liberals might want you to believe, we're not the only ones with shale formations, and we're certainly not the only ones with access to horizontal fracking technology. However, unlike many, our shale reserves are very, very deep. So we have to go deep down, and we're actually a little more expensive to get down there. We fortunately have some wet wells in the Montney region. The Horn River Basin completely shut down now, as far as I can tell, because of the dry basin. So we're struggling in a very competitive world. And what we should be doing, and why we need this 6 months to actually reflect upon this very important motion, this hoist motion brought forward by my colleague, is we need to be able to understand the ramifications of this and the implications of this bill on the climate plan that is embodied in Clean BC, and we will not do that without this additional time. With that, Honourable Speaker, I thank you for your attention.